All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. As promised, Eric Scopel, Duck Territory, 247 Sports. Eric, how you doing?
Busy morning. Thanks for the break from all the Twitter stalking, which I've been doing for the last 5, going on 6 hours.
Yeah, relax. We'll get away from the drama. We can just talk about football players, although in a good direction, good flip. There's one, Jeremiah McClellan, that was a flip here just in the last couple hours that went Oregon's way.
Yeah, that was a big one. That was, I think a couple things to start. Good job by Oregon to avoid the flips. We see it every year. Big time players change schools kind of the last minute. It's hard to keep everybody in place, but Oregon has done an excellent job. They've all 23 verbals that folks went to bed with last night. I think 22 of those have signed. The other has a signing day ceremony at 3 this afternoon. I don't think there's any drama there with Kamar Mathudi, but back to McClellan, to add a player of that caliber at that position specifically, because they lost a couple players to decommitment at receiver over the last couple of months. This was a pretty big ad, and this is a player that, talking with some of our national folks over at 24/7 Sports, there's a sense that he could be someone who could impact things earlier than later, and that's not always the case here. Yeah, you have to go down there. McClellan hasn't officially been announced as a signee, but you go check Twitter, he has officially signed his paperwork. It just maybe the fax machine is running a little slow to Eugene, but um, big addition. And again, I think somebody who could actually help sooner than later. Which again, you don't know if that's always going to be the case or not.
Yeah, my goodness. I don't know when that fax system is going to be replaced, but
Yeah, there's got to be something better, isn't there? With all the
there's
changes in technology, all the advancements, we're still faxing things. Come
yeah,
on.
there's been something better in place for a long time, but that's okay. If they are the ones that have to deal with it, I didn't know that they were still selling fax machines. Those repairmen probably get paid high end by the hour, I guess, to keep that thing going.
And they're only making money off of universities and high
Yes,
schools.
absolutely. All right, Eric, when we look at this class, is this hitting needs? Is this hitting of course Dan Lanning and his staff they weren't going to get everyone, but did they get the majority of high-end targets?
I think the thing that you really like about this class is the defensive line. And if you scroll right to the top there you'll see what I'm talking about. A couple of 5-star commitments from Aiden Breland and Elijah Rushing. These are the top two defensive line prospects on the West Coast. Oregon went and grabbed them both. Rushing was an Arizona commitment for a really long time. That was the hometown school. I think his brother was also at one point committed there. But to snag him and Breland is huge. There's a lot of optimism that tomorrow will bring Jericho Johnson, who's the third highest rated defensive lineman on the West Coast. He's from Northern California. He's more of a interior defensive lineman, like 6'4", 300. And I've heard he's listed at 300, but I've heard he's closer to 330 right now. So it's certainly a gap filler. But I think that's where you start the conversations with those two defensive linemen that they've got already with Jericho Johnson. It's seemingly, waiting in the wings to be the third. That's where this class kind of has been formed, and that is an area of need, of a pretty desperate need for Oregon, who lost 5 veteran defensive linemen this year to graduation. There's some uncertainty about what Jordan Birch will do, who would be by far their best defensive line returnee. He has a decision to make. If he comes back, he's their top guy. If he doesn't come back, there's a ton of need. So I don't know how much you expect from true freshmen in general to play right away, but there will be opportunity for both Breland and Rushing and potentially Jericho Johnson down the line. And then you can look at the linebackers in this class. That was another one. You got Braden Platt's name right there. If you keep scrolling down, you'll find a couple of others that people are really high on. Kamar Mathudi is the recruit that hasn't officially signed yet, along with McClellan. But then you've got Dylan Williams, who they held off. He was being really heavily recruited by Arizona and I think Nebraska. Kingston Lopa, a kid who might play safety, might play linebacker, but regardless has the size and athleticism. So I think they feel really good about what they did in the front seven. Offensive needs probably weren't as high this year. We can talk about quarterback in a moment. I don't think they needed to get a huge blue chip guy because they've kind of got their current and their future at quarterback set already through the portal. But the positions they didn't need to hit, I thought they hit hard. I think the one spot where you go, maybe there's more attention needed would be would have been like running back, but I think that would have been more of a luxury ad. And I know Dewan Riggs is one of the more lowly rated players in this cycle that signed, but go watch his tape and see how effective he's been at playing in Washington, D.C. And you can see why there is some optimism and excitement about what he could provide as well.
So, Eric, since you alluded to quarterback and everybody wants to know about quarterback, and it's pretty much a rule that each class should contain one quarterback.
Yeah.
What do we need to know about Luke Moga?
Well, Moga's an excellent athlete. It's funny because up until about a month ago, there were two prep commitments at quarterback with Moga and Michael Van Buren. Van Buren, I believe, ended up signing with Mississippi State. Moga, not the most highly rated guy, and I had heard a couple of weeks ago that there was talk about him maybe playing some receiver or safety or something like that. If they needed in a pinch, if they had too many quarterbacks, he was open to maybe moving. Doesn't seem like that's the case anymore, but this is a guy who's got incredible athletic tools. And like I said, the fact that they were talking about moving him position sort of speaks to that. But there's a lot of upside there too. And if he's willing to be patient, and who knows with the transfer portal how patient anyone is willing to be these days, but if he's willing to sit and wait for obviously Dylan Gabriel this year, for Dante Moore for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe he's a guy who you see develop behind these players, and he can, those athletic tools kind of come together and he could be a really high end player. But he's certainly an intriguing prospect. Both the guys you actually have kind of scrolled there, he and Trent Ferguson, are the kind of two developmental prospects. Ferguson's a guy who's played 2 years of high school football, was a big time basketball prospect for a while, and has kind of decided to focus on football. He's another player who's probably 3 to 4 years from being a contributor, maybe, but the physical tools are there. And Oregon, I think this cycle took a couple of those kind of dart throws and said, hey, let's take a shot. And if these guys develop, they could be big time contributors down the road.
We've got Eric Skopel jumping on the line with us from 247 Sports, Duck Territory. Get on over there to Duck Territory on 247 Sports. Check out Eric's work, their podcast. When does that drop typically?
Well, hey, thanks for asking. We actually have Coach Dan Lanning on at about 1:30 this afternoon, so that'll be something to look for. And then we will also be posting a reaction to the day's stuff, I think early tomorrow or later tonight. I'm not sure which, but typically we are like a 10 a.m. operation for when those will be 10 a.m. Pacific time for when those will drop.
How about that, folks? Dan Lanning himself will be on with Eric and the crew there. So you said 1:30 Pacific, correct?
That's right.
So 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. Dan Lanning will be on with Eric on Duck Territories podcast. Excellent.
He's given us 10 minutes, which is probably 10 too many for him today. I'm sure he's busy.
Yeah. No, that says a lot for you and what you guys are doing there to be able to grab the head coach for 10 minutes for any length of time on any day, let alone National Signing Day. There's some pessimism out there about these rankings and about National Signing Day because of the transfer portal and how many of these players are still going to be around. Now, we're going to have to let this era flush out for at least a couple more years, maybe, to start to grab some data and say, okay, what is a successful retention rate of these classes going forward 2-3 years down the line? But because I've always made the defense of these ratings and rankings, not that they're accurate for every player. Of course, that would be impossible. There are booms and busts. We all know that. There are guys that come out of nowhere to become JJ Watt, 2-star to Pro Football Hall of Famer. We've got examples all over the place. But the bulk of these ratings and rankings, and I'll give a check mark to 247 Sports in particular in comparison to your competition, just because you've done a great job of not only accurate rankings and probably the most extensive rankings across the board. Now with the transfer portal, that is also something that 247 has taken the initiative to say, we're going to rank transfer portal players. We're also going to give you a look at these classes from a high school standpoint, from a transfer standpoint, and try to put it together in some kind of system that tells you, okay, this is what the entire class looks like. But what's your thought about how important this day is than what it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago?
It's a really interesting discussion point. And I mean, I've been thinking about it, and we've certainly been talking about it on our podcast of what is the value of, like hypothetically, if you have one scholarship available and you can offer it to a 4-star, let's say a pretty good wide receiver recruit who's probably not going to help for a year or two, or you can extend that to a portal guy who has 700, let's say Oregon, he has 750 yards at Mississippi State last year, and you think he can come in and be a starter. That's a pretty easy decision. So, I also think because some folks will say, well, then just go all portal. Well, I don't think that's sustainable. You still need prep players to come through and develop. But, I think Oregon is an interesting case study in what they're doing right now at portal, at quarterback and with the portal at quarterback in particular, with, they had Ty Thompson here for 3 years. They brought in a couple of portal guys that have kind of pushed him out. I think Oregon's going to be better for it. I think Oregon upgraded its quarterback situation pretty clearly by adding Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore over Ty Thompson. So it's the difficult part here too of the way a lot of fans and folks want to kind of, I guess, assess these players that transfer is like a lack of loyalty. I've seen that a lot this week with players Oregon has lost, or with players Oregon is picking up from other schools saying, oh, they aren't loyal to school X. I just think we have to go ahead and kind of forget about all of that and understand this is what it's going to be, and that ultimately what each school is trying to do each cycle is put the best team out there together. And if you have an opportunity, like I said earlier, to replace or to take a player who's experienced and has been successful at the college level over a kid out of the portal where it's kind of, or out of the prep recruiting, where it's kind of a coin flip what you're getting, especially first year, you're probably not getting much of anything. I think it's a pretty easy decision. So I know there's more to it than that, but ultimately those are kind of the decisions the schools make, and those are also the decisions the players make, and those decisions are made together. So I mean, I don't know if I answered the question entirely or just talked myself in circles, but my feeling from this all along is like it's probably just as simple as like who can help you right now. And I'm sure there are times where you do have to take into account the big picture, and that's why you take a dart throw at a Luke Moga or a Trent Ferguson, the guys we were talking about a moment ago. But this is a business where what happens in the short term matters more than the long term a lot of the time, and it's, I think, a real challenge for coaching staffs to kind of balance it. And I will be really curious to see what the future holds for the portal, because I do think there are ways that this could be streamlined probably a lot better than they are currently.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a coaching staff can be as systematic, and we'll take the quarterback position because it's the one that's the most obvious that somebody is going to transfer more likely because they can't start, other than if an offensive lineman transfers because of playing time. Well, they're just not good enough to be one of your top 5 to 7 offensive linemen.
Yeah,
So they're going to transfer out. Whereas you could have a tremendous quarterback, but he's playing behind one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and he's not going to get playing time.
sure.
That this situation is, well, the fans disconnect. I'll take it in that direction. To
Right.
me, is fans are emotional, and that's not a knock on being a fan. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the components of being a fan is you're emotional, and so the loyalty. Of course, you're loyal to your team because you have no career investment in that. So each one of us have made career decisions on what job we're taking based on location, based on money, probably first and foremost, based on career advancement, based on all those things that are the same components that these players are reviewing when they look to see how they can advance their careers. So we can be upset at the system, or if we want to take like an old school saying, we can be, hate the game, not hate the player, because
Well,
this is the way it's
yeah,
played.
that's exactly right. That's where, to me, the frustrations are too often thrown at the wrong people. It's the We jumped into this without really creating a lot of guidelines, and now we're kind of retroactively trying to figure it out. And this is where we are. And I'm sure you, Mark, saw Chip Kelly's comments and probably reacted to them on your show. But I think he said a lot of accurate things about there needs to be someone whose sole job is to just run college football. There's so many moving parts, and the fact that there isn't somebody here to do that, and there's no centralized body, and that all these conferences and all their member schools are off kind of working on the same rules, but also different rules with different. It's just I agreed with a lot of what Coach Kelly had to say, and that's not just because he's a former Oregon great, but because I think he made a lot of sense, and I'm happy that somebody came out and kind of that's more than the portal. He's talking about a realignment and a lot of other things, but I I thought his comments were pretty spot on.
Oh, absolutely. I do too. And, it's something we've talked about on here for years and years and years. So I'm not saying that I'm the first one to bring it to light or anybody's the first, but he said it in such a way. Obviously, he, number one, as the platform being who he is. And number two, he said it in a very succinct, understandable way. But,
Yeah.
People are always asking on here, why was this decision made? Why was that decision made? Well, take any conference commissioner. They are not employed by college football to do what's best for the sport. They're employed by the conference to make the conference as much money as possible, to widen the reach of that conference, the influence, the brand, to build that conference. And if it's that to the detriment of all of college football and their sister conferences, then so be it. But Greg Sankey's hired by the SEC, not by
Mhm.
college football, to do what's best for college football. And that's why the NFL works, because all the owners are in it together, and the commissioner, they are in it. It doesn't do the NFL good if the AFC West is, a moneymaker and the AFC East is horrible and nobody cares about the AFC. That doesn't do the good of the league. So they make decisions for the good of the entire league. And that doesn't isn't done in college football because there's nothing
Yeah,
to other
yeah.
than the playoff and deciding, okay, how are we going to get together at the end to play in a playoff? There's nothing else that brings these conferences together.
Yeah, college football is like if the MLS, Major League Baseball, NFL, and NBA all decided to play a championship against each other, and they had all sorts of different rules going on, and then they just met at the end because there's no they're all they're it's only so minorly aligned. Like you're playing the same sport. Obviously, I'm joking because the hypothetical I mentioned is different sports, and you couldn't do that. But there's the fact there's no centralized governing body has driven me nuts for years. But you're seeing why because right now you're moving into this point of all sorts of things taking place, and it just doesn't feel like there's anybody really guiding the ship. So the ship's kind of guiding itself, and that maybe isn't the way people want it, the best way to do things.
And I think the event that brought this to light more than any was COVID,
Yeah,
where the NCAA had no power over anyone and each conference did whatever it wanted to.
it's a good point. I mean, that was the ultimate example of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten were doing one thing, and then the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12 were doing another thing. And then you look up even retroactively at the season, and it's like some Pac-12 teams played 3 or 4 games, but some SEC teams played a full season basically. And you're kind of going like, yeah, that's sort of telling in terms of the lack of cohesive leadership.
What it looked like to me, Eric, at the time was you got a really good uh, thumbnail inside look at how these conferences operate and what their values are. The SEC basically said, we're playing football. Now we're going to do everything we can to keep everyone safe, but we are playing football. And so we're going to work toward that end, but we're playing football. And then as soon as the ACC and the Big 12 saw that, they were like, well, we're okay. We're the SEC's playing. We're going to play football too. So they were in that round. Then you saw the Pac-12 on the other end of the spectrum, basically saying this is a national uh, emergency. It's a severe situation. We're not playing football. The Big 10 was the one that was interesting in this aspect. The elitists, the academicians, we're not playing football, but the public outcry and the coaches and the players from the common fan was so overwhelming that they turned it eventually and changed the decision. So it was interesting to take all that in.
What a time to be alive.